Hello brothers and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over, I think there's a ton of vocabulary in this game that if you are not familiar with the Warhammer 40k universe, it's just going to go over your head. You're going to be like, I have no idea what that means, and the game definitely does not. Space Marine 2 does not, like, hold your hand and be like, oh, that's what this means. You know, there's no, like, dialogue that's written for somebody specifically who doesn't know anything about this world. They basically are just assuming that if you don't know it, you're going to look it up. And if you do know it, you're going to feel validated because you're like geeking out. You're like that Leo meme where he's leaning forward in his chair like, I know what that means. I know what that is. So I'm going to give you a little bit of help today. I'm going to go over, I think I've got a list of 12 words here. 12 words you're going to hear throughout the campaign and through the operations. And if you are not familiar with the Warhammer world, they're probably going to go right over your head. So I'm going to unpack them for you today so you know exactly what these words mean. So we'll start with some of the basics and then we will work our way down. The very first word we're going to hit is Astartes. What is an Astartes? What's that mean? It basically just means Space Marine. The Space Marines are Astartes, just another name for them. So this is version 2.0 of the Emperor's experiment to genetically enhance human soldiers to enact his will across the galaxy. The Astartes, or the Space Marines, are divided up into lots of different chapters, and they have their own chapter masters, and so they sort of fill different tasks and fulfill different roles. Specifically, we are Ultramarines in this game. Well, the main protagonist is a member of the Ultramarines, and that's the chapter that he belongs to. But Astartes just means a Space Marine. The next word is Primarch. You'll hear the Emperor mentioned a lot, but occasionally you'll hear the word Primarch. Now, think of these as the Emperor's sons. So he tailor-made each of the Primarchs. There's 20 of them. He tailor-made each of them using his own genetic code, each of them designed with a specific purpose in mind. Guilliman is the Primarch who oversees the Ultramarines, the specific chapter that our main protagonist, Titus, belongs to. We'll get to Guilliman later and talk about him a little bit more. But then you even have like the Primarch Vulcan, who was genetically made to be able to withstand extreme temperatures as he oversees a volcanic planet that the Salamander faction, that the Salamander chapter sort of that's their home world. So they're all tailor-made for specific reasons. Next, you've got the Omnissiah. So the Omnissiah is another name for the machine god. So when you hear those two, just know that they refer to the exact same thing. This is a supernatural entity worshipped by the tech priests that you will encounter in the game. They believe that the Omnissiah gifts them with knowledge and technological advances, so any new breakthroughs or discoveries are credited to the Omnissiah as revelations of divine knowledge. They're sort of on thin ice, as this belief in an Omnissiah suggests that there is another god of humanity other than the Emperor. But since the Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests are so important to the Imperium, we let it slide by essentially agreeing that the Omnissiah is an extension of the Emperor, or an avatar of his. The next word on the list is Magus, or Magus, depending on your pronunciation. But a Magus, this is it's a small word, but there's a lot to unpack in it. So I'm going to simplify things a bit here since you don't really need all the backstory right now. But if the topic interests you, I'd suggest you look it up for more information on the Maguses and the Gene Stealer cult. But a Magus is basically, it's kind of like a spy. It looks like a normal human. They are actually an extension of a hive mind sent to infiltrate and gather intelligence. They are imbued with powerful psychic abilities, and their influence is widespread from the top to the bottom of the Imperium. Next up is the Deathwatch. So the Deathwatch, this is a unique chapter of the Astartes, mostly comprised of veteran Space Marines that focuses a lot on like Xenos threats like the Tyrannid. And since we're fighting Tyrannid in this game, it does make sense that our main protagonist, Titus, is fighting the Tyrannids here in the very beginning missions. And, you know, this is not a spoiler. We all know this. We've seen it in the trailers. It's sort of the primary promotional content. We see that Titus is now a member of the Deathwatch. So the Deathwatch allows members of other chapters to serve in its ranks for a time, and that's sort of like a great honor. These Space Marines, what they do is they then wear the insignia of their chapter that they're still loyal to on one of their pauldrons while donning the rest of the telltale black armor of the Deathwatch everywhere else. But the Deathwatch is also home to Space Marines, Astartes, who have abandoned their original chapters, whether for desertion or exile. These men are now known as the Black Shield. And that's our next word, our next vocabulary. Members of the Deathwatch, who were either cast out or abandoned their original Brotherhood chapter, these are called the Black Shield. These men are usually looked down on. So Titus, our main character, volunteered to the Black Shield after leaving his chapter behind, thinking himself unworthy to return to the Ultramarines. Next up is Calgar, the chapter master. So you may hear a reference to Marneus Calgar in the game. He's the current chapter master of the Ultramarines, the brotherhood that Titus belongs to. Calgar is the lord of the homeworld of the Space Marines. He's thought to be the very first Space Marine to undergo the Primaris procedure. So Primaris Space Marines are sort of the next and more powerful version, but you can undergo an operation as a standard Space Marine to be elevated to that Primaris upgraded status, and Calgar is said to be the first one to go through that operation. Next up is Guilliman and Sons of Guilliman. You'll hear these terms mentioned in the game. So we mentioned Guilliman earlier. He's the Primarch who oversees the Ultramarines. So when you hear the term Son of Guilliman, just know that that term refers to all of the Ultramarines in his service. Again, Guilliman is a Primarch. He's sort of like a miniature clone of the Emperor who was tailor-made for a specific purpose of overseeing the Ultramarines. Next up is the Inquisition. So you hear that term a lot in the game. The Inquisition, it's not a movement like you might suspect. It's actually a governing force. It exists outside the standard administration of the Imperium, and it works sort of like the FBI. They're like the secret police, and they work in intelligence. They focus mainly on things like traitors, chaos forces, heresy, and corruption. Inquisitors are the individual agents of the Inquisition, and they have a lot of political sway. Next up is the word chaplain. So a chaplain is the spiritual leader of a chapter. So he's like the head priest of a chapter of Space Marines. He is a Primus Marine, the higher form of Space Marine, and they are warrior priests who serve as ministers for spiritual and psychological health among the Brotherhood. And unlike an earthly priest, the chaplains are actually on the front lines in the heat of the combat, rallying their brothers in arms with their homily of death. Next up is Cadians. So Cadians, you're going to hear this word a lot in the main campaign. Cadians are quite simply just people who came from the homeworld of Cadia. Now, unfortunately, the planet was completely wiped out and is now just a floating mass of rocks in space, but many soldiers of Cadia escaped before its destruction, and they now fight alongside humanity's forces elsewhere. They are capable fighters and marked by their purple eyes. They have a planet-sized chip on their shoulders and are ready to exact vengeance wherever they can. And lastly, the term Thousand Sons. So these are a group of traitorous Space Marines who serve the Chaos God Tzeentch, using lots of sorcery. They use lots of psychic attacks. They underwent a ritual called the Rubric of Ahriman that fused all the former Space Marines' souls into their armor, but destroyed their physical body in the process. So they're essentially spirits bound to armor now, which is why when you kill them in the game, they explode into a purple cloud. All right, that's all the words for the video, and they were pretty oversimplified. I just know that the lore of Warhammer 40k is much more vast than my own knowledge. It is just so big. There are so many books. There's so much written about them. There's novellas. There's a lot of information and backstory that spans, a time span of literally millennia in the lore of Warhammer 40k. So I know these were oversimplifications. If I talked about all of these things at length, this video could easily be an hour long, and I didn't really want that. This is already a crash course, so you have at least some sort of an understanding of what's going on in the game when you hear these words. So I hope you found it helpful. If you did, then let me know by leaving a like in the video, as that's the best free way to support the content right here on YouTube. And stay tuned for additional Space Marines content. Until next time, courage and honor.